The rain against the window pane is the only sound I can tolerate tonight. It's a steady, relentless drumming that almost drowns out the silence in the house. This house used to be filled with noise, laughter, arguments over the TV remote, the sound of my daughter, Emily, practicing her guitar upstairs. Now, the silence is a physical thing. It has weight. It presses down on me, suffocating. On the small table beside my armchair, a glass of amber liquid catches a dim light from the street lamp outside. A half-empty bottle of good single malt stands next to it. It's been my only real companion for months. I take a slow sip. The burn in my throat is a welcome distraction. It's a feeling, at least, and feelings have been in short supply. My phone buzzes on the table. A violent, angry vibration against the polished wood. I don't need to look. I know who it is. It's been the same time every night for a week. A desperate, predictable ritual. But tonight, I don't ignore it. I don't know why. Maybe it's the whiskey. Maybe it's the rain. Or maybe I'm just tired of the silence. I pick it up. The screen glows with her name, Sarah. A name that once meant home. Safety. My entire world. Now it's just a scar. I swipe to answer, my thumb trembling slightly. I don't say anything. I just listen to the static. To the sound of her ragged breathing on the other end. It's the sound of a person who has run out of road. David. Her voice is a ghost whisper, cracked and thin. David. Are you there? I stay silent. Please. She begs. And a sob catches in her throat. I have to tell you something. I wait. The rain drums on. David, I'm pregnant. The words hang in the air between us, traveling miles of wire to land in my quiet, empty living room. They should be a bomb. They should shatter what's left of my world. But they don't. There's nothing left to shatter. I take another sip of whiskey. The liquid cold now. Tasteless. I look around at the ghost of our life together, faded photograph on the mantelpiece. The indentation on the sofa cushion next to mine, where she used to sit. And I feel nothing but a vast, bottomless exhaustion. I know. I say. My voice raspy. Unfamiliar. I end the call before she can respond. The silence that rushes back in is louder than ever. The man in the darkness was a ghost of the man I used to be. A man who had a family. A man who smiled. 6 months earlier, the aroma of roasted chicken and rosemary filled her home. It was a Sunday. And Sunday evenings in the Miller house had a rhythm as old as our marriage. It was the smell of a week ending and a new one beginning. It was the smell of stability. Dad, you're not listening, Emily said, poking my arm with the end of her pen. The point of the essay is the impact of the Stamp Act on colonial printers, not a detailed biography of Benjamin Franklin. I blinked, pulling my focus back to the paper spread across her oak dining table. Right. Sorry. Got carried away. Franklin was just a fascinating guy. Emily rolled her eyes, but a fond smile played on her lips. She had my eyes, but her mother's smile. At 19, she was a freshman in college, home for the weekend, and her presence lit up the house like nothing else could. She was studying literature, but she'd inherited my love for history, a fact that made me ridiculously proud. Fascinating or not, he's not getting me an A on this paper, she teased. Focus, old man. From the kitchen, Sarah's voice floated out, warm and melodic. Leave your father alone, sweetie. He can't help being a history nerd. I looked toward the kitchen archway and saw her there, wiping her hands on her apron. Her hair, once the color of dark honey, was now streaked with graceful threads of silver. In the warm, golden light of the kitchen, she looked beautiful. She looked like the woman I had fallen in love with over 20 years ago. But then she turned her head, and for a moment, her smile faltered as she stared out the window into the darkening backyard. It was a look I was starting to see more often. A distant, wistful expression that made me feel like she was a million miles away. The moment passed. She turned back, her smile firmly in place again. Dinner's almost ready. David, could you open the wine? That was our life. A comfortable, predictable portrait of a happy American family in Maple Creek, Oregon. I was a high school history teacher. Sarah ran the home, having given up her passion for pottery years ago to raise Emily. We lived in a charming craftsman house with a porch swing, and a garden Sarah fussed over every spring. We were, by all accounts, successful. We were happy. Or so I believed. Looking back, the cracks were already there. They were hairline fractures, invisible to the casual observer. The The way Sarah's laughter sometimes sounded a little too bright, a little too forced. The way our conversations at night, after Emily had gone to bed, had dwindled into a comfortable, but hollow, silence. We talked about bills, about the leaky faucet, about Emily's classes. We never talked about us. We hadn't. Not really. In years. I told myself it was normal. It was what happened after 2 decades together. The fiery passion cooled into a gentle, steady warmth. It was called contentment. I was wrong. It was called drifting. As I pulled the cork from a bottle of Merlot, Emily made her announcement. "So, I have some news," she said, her voice buzzing with an excitement she could barely contain. "I want to bring someone home for dinner next Saturday." I paused, the corkscrew in my hand. Someone. Sarah came out of the kitchen. Her interest piqued. She leaned against the doorframe, her expression curious. Emily's cheeks flushed a pretty pink. "His name is Leo. We've been seeing each other for a couple of months." My fatherly instincts kicked in immediately. A dozen questions sprang to mind. What does he do? How old is he? Does he have a motorcycle? I settled on a neutral. "Oh yeah. Tell us about him." "He's amazing," Emily gushed, her eyes sparkling. "He's a musician. A guitarist. He writes his own songs. He's so passionate and smart. He's older, 22, but he's really mature. A musician." I tried to keep my expression neutral. I pictured some scruffy kid with ripped jeans and a bad attitude. "That's wonderful, honey," Sarah said, and her voice held a note of genuine enthusiasm that surprised me. It was more than just a mother's polite interest. "What's he like?" "He's just different," Emily tried to explain. "He sees the world in a different way. He's an artist. You know. Like you, Mom." The word struck a chord. I saw a flicker of something in Sarah's eyes, a brief, intense spark. She had packed away her potter's wheel and kiln in the basement almost 15 years ago. She called it her old life. We never talked about the gallery shows she used to have, or the awards she'd won in college. Seeing that spark, I felt a familiar pang of guilt. I had always encouraged her to go back to it, but she always had an excuse. The timing wasn't right. Emily needed her. The house needed work. "Well," I said, forcing a cheerful tone, "we'd love to meet him. Saturday is perfect." Emily beamed, relieved. "Great. You'll love him. I promise." Later that night, as Sarah and I were getting ready for bed, I tried to bridge the small, unspoken distance that had settled between us. I came up behind her as she stood at the vanity, brushing her hair. I wrapped my arms around her waist and rested my chin on her shoulder. Looking at our reflection in the mirror, we looked like we were supposed to look. A middle-aged couple, comfortable with each other. A musician. "Ha," I said, trying to make it a joke. "Should I be worried?" She didn't smile. She just kept brushing her hair with long, slow strokes. "Don't be silly, David. She's happy. I know. It's just happening so fast. College. Boyfriends." I sighed. "Our little girl isn't so little anymore. None of us are getting any younger," she said softly. Her eyes in the mirror weren't looking at me. They were looking at her own reflection. But it felt like she was looking through it, at something far behind us. She placed her hand over mine on her waist. But it felt like a polite gesture, not an affectionate one. It was a gesture that said, "I acknowledge you are here." I squeezed her gently. "I love you, Sarah." She finally met my gaze in the mirror. A faint, sad smile touched her lips. "I know, David," she whispered. It was the same thing I would say to her 6 months later. A simple acknowledgement of a fact, empty of the feeling it was supposed to carry. She pulled away, the space between us suddenly cold. "I'm tired. I think I'm going to bed." I watched her climb into her side of the bed and turn her back to me. I stood there for a long time, looking at our reflection in the mirror, feeling a sense of unease that I couldn't quite name. It felt like watching a stranger. The week leading up to the dinner was filled with a strange energy. Emily was giddy, constantly texting on her phone and smiling to herself. I found myself feeling more and more apprehensive. A baseless, irrational anxiety I chalked up to being an overprotective dad. But it was Sarah who was the most different. A change had come over her. She hummed while she cleaned the house. She spent an entire afternoon baking a ridiculously complicated chocolate cake from scratch. On Saturday, she took ours getting ready. trying on 3 different dresses before settling on a dark blue one that I hadn't seen her wear in years. It was a dress from her old life, one she'd worn to one of her art shows. "Wow, Mom, you look incredible," Emily said when she came downstairs. Sarah flushed. A girlish please look on her face. "Thank you, sweetie. I just wanted to make a good impression." When the doorbell rang at precisely 7 o'clock, I felt my stomach clench. I opened the door, a practiced, friendly but firm fatherly smile ready on my face. The man standing on our porch was not what I expected. He wasn't a scruffy kid. He was tall, with a lean, weary build. He had dark, messy hair that fell over his forehead, and intense, brooding eyes the color of dark coffee. He wasn't handsome in a conventional way, but he had a raw, magnetic charisma that was immediately apparent. He was holding a bottle of wine in one hand and a single, perfect gardenia in the other. "Mr. Miller," he said, his voice a low, smooth baritone. "I'm Leo Vance. It's a real honor to meet you." He smiled, and it was a devastatingly charming, confident smile. He wasn't a boy. He was a man, and every protective instinct in my body went on high alert. "David. Please, call me David," I said, shaking his hand. His grip was firm. Emily rushed to the door and threw her arms around him. "Leo, you're here. Wouldn't miss it," he murmured, kissing the top of her head. He then turned his attention to Sarah, who had appeared behind me. He handed her the gardenia. "Mrs. Miller," he said, his eyes locking with hers. "Emily told me this was your favorite flower." Sarah took the flower, her fingers brushing against his. I saw that spark in her eyes again, brighter this time, a wildfire. "Thank you, Leo. That's very thoughtful. Please, call me Sarah." The way she said her own name sounded different. Younger, lighter. The dinner started well enough. Leo was polite, engaging, and smart. He asked me about my history classes, listening with what seemed like genuine interest. He complimented Sarah's cooking effusively. He doted on Emily, holding her hand across the table, making her laugh with a private joke. I should have been reassured. I should have been happy for my daughter. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I watched the way he and Sarah interacted. He asked her about her art, not in a casual, polite way, but with a deep, probing curiosity. "Emily told me you're a potter," he said, his gaze fixed on her. "That's incredible. It's such an elemental, honest form of creation, working with the earth itself." Sarah, who usually deflected any questions about her past, opened up completely. "It was a long time ago," she started. But then her voice gained strength. "I loved the feel of it. The way you could take a lump of nothing, just mud and water, and shape it into something beautiful, or something useful, something that would last." "I get that," Leo said, nodding slowly. "It's like music. You take silence, and you shape it with notes and chords. You give it a voice." They were off. They talked about art, about music, about the desperate, beautiful struggle to create something meaningful in the world. They talked about passion. They spoke a language I didn't understand, a language of a world I didn't belong to. Emily and I just sat and listened, watching them. Emily looked proud, as if to say, "See, isn't he perfect?" But I saw something else. I saw my wife come to life in a way I hadn't seen in 20 years. Her cheeks were flushed. Her eyes were bright. She leaned forward when she spoke, her hands gesturing animatedly. She was vibrant. She was glowing. She was a stranger to me. And she wasn't looking at her daughter's boyfriend. She was looking at a kindred spirit, a reflection of a life she had abandoned. When the evening ended and Leo finally left, after a long, lingering goodbye with Emily on the porch, I felt a profound sense of dread settle over me. Sarah stood at the living room window, watching his car pull away from the curb. She was holding the single gardenia he had given her, stroking one of its soft white petals with her thumb. "He seems nice," I said, the word sounding inadequate and hollow. She didn't turn around. She just stared out into the dark street. "He's more than nice, David," she said, her voice soft and distant. "He's alive." The words hung in the air, an unspoken accusation. I looked at my wife, the mother of my child, the woman I had built my entire life with, and for the first time, I felt a tremor of real, terrifying fear. I told myself I was being ridiculous. That I was a jealous, middle-aged man imagining things. But as I watched her silhouette against the dark window, I couldn't escape the feeling that I hadn't just met my daughter's new boyfriend. I had just witnessed the beginning of the end of my world. The week after that dinner felt like living in a photograph that was slowly fading. The colors of our life, once so vibrant and certain, were turning to gray. On the surface, nothing had changed. We still ate dinner together. We still asked each other about our days. But an invisible wall of glass had descended between Sarah and me. I could see her, but I couldn't reach her. Every word, every touch felt muted, distant. She began taking long walks in the afternoons, just to clear my head. She'd say, pulling on a pair of running shoes she hadn't worn in a decade. She signed up for a pottery class at the community college, twice a week, in the evenings. Isn't it great? She'd said with that new, bright smile that never quite reached her eyes. I'm finally doing something for myself. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to be the supportive husband who was thrilled his wife was rediscovering her passion. But I knew it was a lie. Her hands were always clean, without a speck of clay under her nails. When I asked what she was making, her descriptions were vague and dismissive. Oh, just some bowls. I'm rusty. It's nothing. Really. The real change was her phone. It was always with her, either clutched in her hand or lying face down on the table beside her. It was a new limb, an extension of her being. It would buzz late at night, and she would snatch it up. A flicker of Samathan panic, excitement, in her eyes as she read the screen. If I walked into the room, she would angle it away from me, her posture suddenly defensive. We were living like polite strangers, ghosts haunting the hallways of our own home. The silence between us grew heavier each day, filled with the things we weren't saying. I felt a constant, low-grade nausea, the kind you get when you're standing on the edge of something high and terrifying. I kept telling myself I was wrong, that I was letting my insecurities get the better of me. Sarah was just going through a phase, a midlife reawakening. It had nothing to do with that boy. It couldn't. The confirmation of my deepest fears came not from my wife, but from my daughter. Emily came home for the weekend 2 weeks later, and the light had gone out of her eyes. She was quiet, withdrawn. She picked at the lasagna I'd made, her favorite, and barely said a word. That evening, she found me in the den, where I was pretending to read a book. She curled up on the ottoman at my feet, pulling a blanket around her shoulders like she used to do when she was a little girl. "Dad," she said, her voice small. "What's up, kiddo?" I put my book down, giving her my full attention. Her eyes welled up with tears. "It's Leo. I don't know. He's being so weird." My heart hammered against my ribs. I had to force myself to stay calm, to keep my voice even. "Weird how? He's so distant," she whispered, a tear rolling down her cheek. "He cancels plans at the last minute. He takes hours to text me back. When we are together, it feels like he's not really there. It's like his mind is somewhere else." She looked up at me, her expression so full of hurt and confusion it broke my heart. "Is it me? Did I do something wrong?" I pulled her into a hug, my arms wrapping tightly around her. I held my daughter as she cried, and every sob was a dagger in my gut. I was comforting her for the pain being inflicted by a man who, I suspected, was simultaneously destroying her mother. The hypocrisy burned like acid in my throat. "No, sweetie. No, you didn't do anything wrong," I murmured into her hair, my voice thick with an anger I couldn't show. "It's not you. I promise." I was lying to her. I was protecting her from a truth so monstrous I could barely comprehend it myself. As I held her, I made a decision. I couldn't live in this state of sickening suspicion any longer. I had to know. For Emily's sake. For my own. The opportunity came the following Tuesday. It was Sarah's pottery class night. I told her I was going to a school board meeting that was expected to run late. It was a lie. The meeting had been last week. I parked my car down the street from the community college and waited. I felt cheap. Sordid. A character in a bad movie. But I had to see for myself. 8 o'clock came and went. The time her class was supposed to start. Her car was nowhere in sight. At 9:30. When the class was over, the parking lot emptied out. But she was still not there. My nausea turned into a cold, hard certainty in the pit of my stomach. I drove home, the streets of our quiet little town seeming alien and hostile. When I pulled into our driveway, her car was there. The house was dark except for a single lamp in the living room. She was sitting on the sofa, still in her coat, staring at the blank television screen. The meeting was cancelled, I said, my voice flat. She jumped, startled. She hadn't heard me come in. Oh, David, you're home early. Where were you? Sarah, I asked, not moving from the doorway. What do you mean? I was at my class, she said. But she wouldn't meet my eyes. The lie was clumsy, brittle. No, you weren't. I was there. I waited. Panic flared in her eyes. Why would you do that? Are you spying on me? She tried to turn it around. To make me the villain. I can't believe you don't trust me. David, give me a reason to. I shot back, my voice colder than I intended. Where were you? She stood up, her jaw set. I went for a drive after class. To think. Is that a crime? We stood there, staring at each other across the living room, the chasm between us wider than it had ever been. There was nothing more to say. Without proof. It was just my word against hers, my suspicion against her lies. The rest of the week passed in a state of icy cold war. The end came on a Saturday morning. It was a beautiful, sunny autumn day. The kind of day that made you believe everything was right with the world. Emily was at the library studying with friends. Sarah was upstairs, taking a shower. I was in the kitchen, making coffee, when I heard her phone buzz on the granite countertop where she left it. I didn't mean to look. I swear I didn't. But the screen lit up, and the name on the notification was simply L. A single, damning initial. And below it, the first line of the message was visible. Last night was incredible. Can't stop thinking about you. The air left my lungs. The coffee mug in my hand felt impossibly heavy. The world tilted on its axis, and for a long moment, I couldn't breathe. It was real. All of it. The walks, the pottery class, the distant eyes, the stolen smiles at her phone. It wasn't paranoia. It was the truth. I stood there, frozen, until I heard the water shut off upstairs. I heard her moving around, the soft thud of her footsteps on the hardwood floor above. I picked up the phone. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped it. I walked to the bottom of the stairs and waited. She came down a few minutes later, wrapped in a fluffy white robe, her hair damp and smelling of lavender. She smiled when she saw me. A relaxed, easy smile she hadn't given me in months. It was the smile of someone with a delicious, happy secret. Morning, she said cheerfully. Is the coffee ready? I didn't say a word. I just held up the phone, the screen still glowing with the message. Her smile vanished. The color drained from her face. I watched her expression shift from surprise to denial, then to fear, and finally, to a cold, hard resignation. She knew. The game was over. Sarah, I said, and my own voice sounded like it was coming from a great distance. Who is Elle? She tried, one last time, to lie. It's Lisa. From my class? It's not what you think. Stop, I said, the single word sharp as a crack of a whip. Don't insult me. Don't lie to me. Not anymore. I took a step toward her. It's him. Isn't it? It's our daughter's boyfriend. She flinched. But she didn't deny it. She just stared at me, her eyes wide and defiant. In that moment, I didn't see the woman I loved. I saw a stranger. A person capable of a betrayal so profound it defied imagination. The rage I had been suppressing for weeks erupted. It wasn't loud. It was a terrifying, quiet fury that shook my entire body. How could you? I whispered, the words raw with pain. How could you do this to Emily? How could you do this to us? And then she said the words that shattered the last remaining piece of my heart. She lifted her chin, and her voice was steady, almost cold. Because with him, I feel alive. David. For the first time in 20 years, I feel like myself again. I feel seen. Seen. The word was a punch to the gut. All the years of my devotion, my support, my steady, quiet love, all of it had made her feel invisible. My stability, the very foundation I had built our lives on, had been a cage for her. The argument that followed was ugly. It was a hurricane of 2 decades of unspoken resentments and buried disappointments. Things were said that could never be unsaid. Accusations were thrown like stones. And through it all, she never cried. She never once said she was sorry. Her only emotion seemed to be a kind of relief. The relief of someone who had finally been caught, who no longer had to pretend. By the time it was over, the sun was high in the sky, and our marriage was dead on the floor between us. I'm leaving, she said, her voice devoid of any emotion. I just stared at her, numb. What? I'm leaving you. David. I can't do this anymore. I can't be this person. She went upstairs. I didn't follow her. I stood in the exact same spot at the bottom of the stairs, listening. I heard the sounds of drawers opening and closing, the zip of a suitcase. 20 minutes later, she came back down, carrying a single overnight bag. She was dressed in jeans and a sweater. She looked like she was going on a weekend trip. She walked past me without a glance. At the front door, she paused and placed a folded piece of paper on the hall table. I'm sorry for Emily, she said, her back still to me. It was the only apology she offered. Then she opened the door and walked out, closing it softly behind her. I didn't move for a long time. The house was utterly silent. I walked over to the table and picked out the note. My hands were steady now. The shaking had stopped. There was just a vast, cold emptiness inside me. I unfolded the paper. There were only a few lines, written in her elegant, familiar script. David, I know you won't understand. I'm not sure I do either. I just know I can't live like this anymore. Don't try to find me. Sarah. No, I love you. No, goodbye. Just an exit. I crumpled the note in my fist. The front door opened again, and my heart leaped with a sudden, stupid surge of hope. But it was Emily. Her cheeks rosy from the autumn air, a stack of books in her arms. Hey, Dad, she said, smiling. God, it's a gorgeous day. Where's Mom? She looked at my face, and her smile faltered. Dad, what's wrong? You look awful. I looked at my beautiful, innocent daughter. Her whole world was built on the foundation of our family, a foundation I now knew was made of lies. And it was my job to take a sledgehammer and smash it into a million pieces. I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came out. How do you tell your child that her mother has not only left her father, but has run away with her own boyfriend? How do you say those words? There is no guidebook for this. No chapter in any parenting manual that tells you how to detonate your child's life. I stood there in the entryway of our home, the sun streaming through the stained glass window beside the door, painting cheerful patterns of red and blue on the floor where our lives had just ended. Emily was watching me, her initial smile replaced by a creeping dread. She knew something was terribly wrong. Dad, you're scaring me, she said, dropping her books onto the hall table, right next to the crumpled note I was still clutching in my fist. Where's Mom? I led her into the living room. It felt like walking a prisoner to their execution. I sat her down on the sofa, the same sofa where Sarah had sat just an hour before, a stranger in her own home. I sat in my armchair opposite her. The space between us felt like a mile-wide canyon. Emily, I began, and my voice was a fragile, unfamiliar thing. Something has happened, I told her. I didn't know how else to do it but to be direct, to rip the bandage off in one brutal, agonizing motion. I told her that her mother had left. I watched the confusion cloud her face, her brow furrowing. Left? What do you mean? Left? Like, to the grocery store? No, I said, my voice cracking. She's left me. She's left us. The confusion turned to disbelief. No, that's crazy. You guys were fine this morning. You must have had a fight. She'll be back. She started to stand up, a frantic energy in her movements. I'll call her. We can fix this. I held up my hand, a gesture that felt impossibly heavy. Emily, sit down. There's more. This was the hardest part. This was the part that felt like a physical act of violence. I took a deep breath, the air in the room thick and suffocating. She didn't leave alone. Emily stared at me, her eyes wide with incomprehension. And then, as the silence stretched, a dawning horror began to creep into her expression. It was a slow, sickening realization. She connected the dots of the past few weeks. Her mother's sudden glow, her boyfriend's sudden distance. The pieces clicked into place with an audible, shattering sound that only the two of us could hear. Her whisper was barely audible. No, I didn't have to say his name. I just nodded. A single, grim movement of my head. The truth hung in the air between us, obscene and monstrous. The sound that came out of my daughter was not a cry. It was a raw, guttural wail of pure agony. A sound of an animal caught in a trap. It was the sound of a heart being ripped out. She doubled over, clutching her stomach as if she'd been physically struck. Sobs racked her body. Violent, convulsive shudders that seemed to tear her apart from the inside. I moved to the sofa and wrapped my arms around her. She was stiff at first. Then she collapsed against me, burying her face in my chest, her tears soaking through my shirt. I held her, rocking her back and forth like she was a small child again, awakened by a nightmare. But this was no nightmare. This was our life now. I had never felt so helpless. I was her father. My one job, my only purpose on this earth, was to protect her, and I had failed in the most spectacular way imaginable. The two people who were supposed to love her most in the world had conspired to inflict a wound so deep I wasn't sure it could ever heal. The days that followed are a blur of grief. Our house, once a home, transformed into a mausoleum. Every object held a memory, a ghost. The pottery vase on the mantelpiece that Sarah had made in college. The framed photo of the three of us on a beach in North Carolina, smiling, happy, a family of perfect strangers. The silence was the worst part. It was a living entity, filled with the echoes of laughter and conversations that would never happen again. Emily locked herself in her room. She wouldn't eat. She wouldn't talk. I would leave trays of food outside her door, which would remain untouched for hours. I could hear her crying sometimes. A low, constant sound of despair that was the new soundtrack of our home. I tried to talk to her, knocking gently on her door, my voice muffled and pleading. Please, sweetie, let me in. Let's talk. Go away, was the only response. Her voice raw and broken. I felt like I was losing her, too. It was as if Sarah, in leaving, had taken a part of my daughter with her. I went through the motions of living. I called the school and told them I needed to take a few days off for a family emergency. The irony was bitter. We weren't a family anymore. I tried to call Sarah's cell phone a dozen times. It went straight to voicemail every time. Her number was disconnected a few days later. She had vanished. Leo, too, had disappeared from the face of the earth. His phone was off. His social media accounts deleted. They had simply ceased to exist in our world. The small town of Maple Creek was not a place where secrets could be kept for long. The question started subtly. Neighbors asking if Sarah was feeling all right, since they hadn't seen her in the garden. My colleagues at school sending texts, asking if everything was okay. I gave vague, evasive answers. She's visiting her sister in California. She needed a break. Decided to take a trip. The lies felt like swallowing sand. Gritty and painful. But the truth has a way of seeping out. Emily's friends knew she had broken up with Leo. Sarah's friends knew she wasn't at her sister's. The whispers started. The sideways glances in the grocery store. The sudden silences when I walked into the teacher's lounge. People knew. They might not have known the sordid details, but they knew the Miller family. That perfect, stable family had imploded. I became a subject of pity and morbid curiosity. David Miller, the poor history teacher whose wife just up and left him. I could feel their eyes on my back, could almost hear their hushed conversations. After a week of near total silence, Emily finally emerged from her room. She was gone, with dark circles under her eyes that made her look like a stranger. She looked years older than she had just a week ago. She found me in the kitchen, staring into a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. I'm going back to my dorm, she announced, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. I don't think that's a good idea, I said gently. Maybe you should take some more time. Time for what? She snapped, a flash of anger in her empty eyes. To sit here and stare at the walls? To think about them? I can't be in this house. Dad. Every room, I see her. I see him sitting at our table. Her voice broke. I have to go. I knew she was right. This house had become a prison of memories for both of us. But I was terrified of letting her go, of her being alone with that much pain. I'll drive you, I said. The hour-long drive to her university was conducted in near total silence. I kept glancing over at her, wanting to say something, anything, that could offer us some comfort. But words felt useless. What could I possibly say? It's going to be okay? It was a lie. We both knew it. When we got to her dorm room, I helped her carry her bag inside. It was a small, sterile space, but it was away from Maple Creek. It was a world that Sarah and Leo had not yet contaminated. As I was about to leave, she finally spoke to me, her voice low and intense. I hate her, she said, staring at the floor. I thought I would be sad, but I'm not. I hate her. How can a mother do that to her child? I don't know. Emily, I whispered. the words tasting like ash. I don't know. She looked up at me then, and her eyes were filled with a desperate plea. Promise me something. Dad. Anything. Promise me you won't take her back. Ever. No matter what. I looked into my daughter's broken eyes. I saw the depth of her betrayal. A wound that went far beyond a cheating spouse. This was a violation of the most sacred trust that exists. The one between a mother and a child. I promise. I said. And I meant it with every fiber of my being. The weeks turned into a month. Then 2. Life settled into a new, grim routine. I would go to work, stand in front of my history students, and talk about the rise and fall of empires, all the while my own had crumbled to dust. I would come home to the empty, silent house. I'd make dinner for one, eat it standing over the sink, and then sit in the den with my whiskey until I was tired enough to sleep without dreaming. I talked to Emily every day. Our calls were brief, functional. How are your classes? Are you eating? Do you need anything? We never mentioned Sarah's name. It was an unspoken agreement. She was a non-person. To speak her name would be to acknowledge she had ever existed. And that was a pain neither of us was ready to face. I began the process of dismantling my marriage. I hired a lawyer. A kind, middle-aged woman named Mrs. Gable who looked at me with sympathetic eyes. She explained the process of filing for divorce on grounds of desertion. She asked questions I couldn't answer. Do you have any idea where your wife might be? Mr. Miller. No. Any way of contacting her? No. Has she made any attempt to contact you or your daughter? No. I was a man adrift. My past had been erased. My future was a blank, terrifying fog. I was 48 years old, and I had to learn how to live again, from scratch. I tried. I forced myself to go to the gym. I met some colleagues for a beer after work on Fridays. I tried to engage in small talk, to pretend I was a normal person. But I felt like an imposter. I was a ghost at the feast of life, watching everyone else laugh and connect while I was trapped behind a veil of grief and shame. The holidays were brutal. Thanksgiving was a quiet, sad affair at a local diner with Emily. The two of us pushing turkey and stuffing around our plates, surrounded by happy families. Christmas was worse. I didn't have the heart to put up a tree. The thought of unpacking the ornaments, each one holding a memory of a Christmas past, was more than I could bear. On Christmas Eve, I found myself in the basement. I was looking for a spare fuse, but my eyes landed on a corner covered by a dusty tarp. I knew what was under it. I pulled the tarp away, and there it was. Sarah's potter's wheel and her kiln. Boxes of old glazes and tools. An entire life, packed away and forgotten. Sitting on top of a box was a half-finished vase. A delicate, beautiful thing she had abandoned years ago. I picked it up. My fingers traced the smooth, cool clay. I remembered the day she had started it. She had been so excited, so full of creative energy. And then Emily had gotten sick. A bad case of pneumonia. And Sarah had put it aside to care for her. She had never gone back to it. I stood there in the dusty silence of the basement, holding this relic of the woman I had married. And for the first time since she left, I allowed myself to feel something other than anger. I felt a profound, aching sadness. I tried to pinpoint the exact moment it had all gone wrong. Was it when she packed this away? Was it when Emily left for college? Or had the cracks been there from the very beginning? Invisible fissures in the foundation that were destined to bring the whole structure down? I didn't have any answers. All I had was an empty house, a broken daughter, and the ghost of a life that was no longer mine. The worst part was a sliver of my heart that still missed her. I hated myself for it. I hated that after everything she had done, there was still a part of me that listened for her car in the driveway, that expected to see her walk into the room and say this was all just a horrible, terrible mistake. It was a weakness, a foolishness, that I couldn't seem to excise, no matter how much whiskey I drank. 3 months after she left, I woke up in the middle of the night. The house was cold and silent, but something had woken me. A noise. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding, listening. And then I heard it again. A faint, hesitant knocking on the front door. My first thought was that I was dreaming, or that it was a branch tapping against the house. But the knocking came again, louder this time, more insistent. A cold dread washed over me. No one would be at my door at 2 a.m. I slipped out of bed, my feet cold on the hardwood floor. I crept down the stairs, my senses on high alert. I peered through the peephole, and my world stopped turning for the second time. It was her. It was Sarah. She was standing on my porch, illuminated by the pale yellow light. She was thinner, her face pale and drawn. Her hair was messy, and she was hugging herself against the cold. Though she wasn't wearing a proper coat, she looked broken, lost, and she was pregnant. Her belly was a small, but undeniable, curve beneath her thin sweater. A perfect, round testament to her betrayal. I stared, unable to breathe, unable to think. All the anger, all the hatred, all the promises I had made to my daughter, swirled in my head. She must have sensed me there, because she leaned her forehead against the door, and I heard her whisper my name through the thick wood. David! She sobbed, her voice muffled and desperate. Please, let me in. I have nowhere else to go. The world narrowed to the small circle of glass in the peephole. Sarah, my wife, stood on the other side of the door, a stranger and a ghost, carrying the living proof of her betrayal. My mind was a maelstrom of conflicting impulses. One part of me, the primal, wounded part, wanted to scream at her through the door, to tell her to get lost, to disappear and never come back. I wanted to hurt her the way she had hurt me, the way she had shattered our daughter. I thought of my promise to Emily. Promise me you won't take her back. Ever. But another part of me, a part one despised for its weakness, saw the woman shivering on my porch. I saw the exhaustion etched on her face, the desperation in her posture. She was the mother of my child. She was the woman I had promised to love and cherish, in sickness and in health, and she was in trouble. The baby, her pregnancy, was an abomination. But the woman herself, the woman was a wreck. My hand was on the deadbolt. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, my fingers frozen, my mind at war with itself. What would I do? What was the right thing to do? There was no right thing. Every possible path led to more pain. Her ragged sobs through the door made the decision for me. It wasn't a conscious choice. It was an instinct, a muscle memory from a lifetime of being her husband, her protector. I turned the lock. The click sounded like a gunshot in the silent house. I opened the door just a few inches. The cold night air rushed in, carrying the scent of damp earth and her faint, familiar perfume. She looked up, her eyes red and swollen from crying, filled with a mixture of terror and relief. David! She breathed. What do you want? Sarah. My voice was a low, rough thing, devoid of any warmth. He left me. She whispered, the words tumbling out in a rush. Leo. He's gone. As soon as I told him I was pregnant, he disappeared, packed his bags one night and was gone. Took all my money. She started to tremble, not just from the cold, but from the force of her despair. I have nothing. David. Nowhere to go. I've been sleeping in my car for 3 days. Sleeping in her car. My wife. The thought was sickening. I looked past her to the curb, where her old sedan was parked. It looked dirtier, more beat up than I remembered. A life of chaos contained in a few cubic feet of metal. That's not my problem, I said. And the words tasted like poison, even though I meant them. I know. She cried, tears streaming freely down her face now. I know I don't deserve anything from you. I don't deserve your help, but I'm asking anyway. Not for me. For the baby. She looked down at her stomach, her hand instinctively moving to rest on the small swell. Please, David. Just for a few nights. Until I can figure something out. It's so cold. I looked at her belly. It was the physical manifestation of my entire nightmare. It was Leo's child. A child conceived in an act that had destroyed my family. And she was asking me to shelter it. To bring it into my home. Into Emily's home. The promise I made to my daughter screamed in my head. But the image of Sarah, pregnant and homeless, freezing in a car just down the street, was a horror of a different kind. It was a failure of a different oath. One I had made 20 years ago in a church. Against every rational thought. Against every ounce of self-preservation. I stepped back and opened the door wider. Get inside, I said. My voice flat. She stumbled in, looking around the familiar entryway as if she'd never seen it before. She looked small and lost in the house she had once commanded. The smell of her perfume, once so comforting, now felt like an invasion. Thank you, she whispered, not looking at me. Don't thank me, I said, closing and locking the door behind her. You can have the couch. Don't go upstairs. Don't go near Emily's room. In the morning, we figure out what you're going to do, and then you're gone. She nodded, her eyes fixed on the floor. I understand. I left her there and went back upstairs, my heart pounding a sick, heavy rhythm. I didn't go back to my bed. I went into the spare room, the one we used as an office, and sat in the dark, staring out the window. I had just let the enemy into my fortress. I had betrayed my promise to my daughter. And for what? For a ghost of a memory? For a flicker of pity that I already regretted? Sleep was impossible. I could hear her downstairs, the soft sounds of her settling onto the sofa, the muffled sobs that continued long into the night. Every sound was an accusation. The next morning, the house was filled with a tension so thick it felt hard to breathe. I went down to the kitchen to make coffee, and she was already awake, sitting huddled on the couch under the afghan my mother had whereupon for us as a wedding gift. Seeing her there, wrapped in a relic of our life together, sent a fresh wave of anger through me. She looked up when I entered, her face pale and tired in the gray morning light. "I can make the coffee," she offered, her voice hesitant. "I've got it," I said curtly. I moved around the kitchen, my movements stiff and deliberate. It was our kitchen, but we were like two strangers who had been forced to share a space. We didn't talk as I made the coffee. When it was done, I poured a cup and pushed it across the counter toward her without a word. She took it, her fingers trembling. "We need to talk about Emily," I said, getting straight to the point. "She can't know you're here. She comes home some weekends, unannounced. You cannot be here when she is." She flinched as if I'd slapped her. "I know. I would never. I wouldn't do that to her." "You already did," I said, the words sharp and cruel. I couldn't help it. The rage was a living thing inside me, and it needed to lash out. She looked down into her mug. "I know," she whispered. "I think about it every minute of every day. What I did to her." "To you? Do you?" I shot back, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "Is that what you were thinking about when you were with him?" She looked up, and for the first time, I saw a flash of the old Sarah, a spark of defiance in her tired eyes. "You think you know what happened, David? You think it was simple, that I was just bored and wanted some excitement? It wasn't like that. Then what was it like?" "Sarah," I demanded, leaning against the counter, "enlighten me. What cosmic, beautiful reason did you have for sleeping with our daughter's boyfriend?" "He saw me," she said, her voice trembling with a desperate need to be understood. "You looked at me, and you saw a wife, a mother. You saw a comfortable habit you'd had for 20 years. He looked at me, and he saw me. The artist. The woman I used to be. The person I forgot existed. So you destroyed your daughter's life for a compliment?" I sneered. "It wasn't a compliment," she cried, slamming the mug down on the coffee table. Coffee sloshed over the rim. It was like being able to breathe again after years of holding my breath. I know it was wrong. God, David, do you think I don't know it was monstrous? But for a few weeks, I felt alive. I felt like I mattered. I just stared at her, my anger slowly being replaced by a cold, empty feeling. She was talking about a life I had provided her, a life of comfort and safety and love, as if it were a prison sentence. The stability I had prided myself on giving her had been, in her eyes, a slow death. It was a truth I couldn't process. "And him?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "Was it worth it? You're great. Passionate love?" Her face crumpled. The defiance vanished, replaced by a raw, naked pain. "He never loved me," she said, her voice breaking. "I was a novelty, an older woman who paid attention to him. He used me. And when it wasn't fun anymore, when it got real, he was gone." She finally broke down completely, burying her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with deep, gut-wrenching sobs. I stood there and watched her, feeling nothing. No pity, no sympathy, just a vast, barren emptiness. The woman crying on my sofa was a stranger who had stolen my wife's face. Her temporary stay of a few nights stretched into a week, then 2. It was a living hell. We were ghosts in our own home, circling each other, never speaking unless it was absolutely necessary. I slept in the spare room. She lived on the couch. I would leave food for her on the kitchen counter, and she would eat it after I had gone to my room. The house became a prison for both of us. She never went outside during the day, terrified a neighbor would see her. Her presence was a constant, oppressive weight. Her pregnancy became more obvious each day. A silent, growing accusation in the middle of our living room. I felt like I was losing my mind. I was lying to everyone. To my colleagues, to my friends, and most importantly, to Emily. Our phone calls became a minefield. How's the house, Dad? Feeling any less empty? She'd ask. It's quiet. I'd lie, my heart pounding as I listened for any sound from the living room. Still getting used to it. The deception was eating me alive. I was breaking my promise to her every single day. I had allowed the source of all her pain to take up residence in our home, and I was hiding it from her. The guilt was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. One afternoon, I came home from work early. I found Sarah in the basement, standing in front of her old potter's wheel. She was just looking at it, one hand resting on the dusty wheel head. She didn't hear me come down the stairs. What are you doing? I asked, my voice startling her. She turned, a guilty look on her face. Nothing. Just remembering. She looked so fragile standing there, surrounded by the ghosts of her abandoned dreams. For a fleeting moment, the anger receded, and I felt a pang of something else. A deep, profound sorrow for everything we had lost, for the people we used to be. Why did you stop, Sarah? I asked, my voice softer than it had been in weeks. Really? Why? She sighed. A long, weary sound. I don't know. After Emily was born, she was my whole world. It was easy to put all this away. And then, I guess I just got scared. Scared of what? Scared of trying and failing. She said, her eyes distant. Scared that I wasn't any good anymore. It was easier to be a wife and a mother. There was a rule book for that. With this, there are no rules. It's just you and the clay. It was easier to forget I ever wanted it. We stood there in the dusty silence of the basement, and for the first time, I felt like I was seeing a glimpse of the real reason. It wasn't just about Leo. He was just a symptom, a catalyst. The disease was a deeper, older unhappiness, a slow erosion of self that had been happening for years, right under my nose. I had been so content with the life we had built that I never noticed she was suffocating in it. The conversation didn't change anything. It didn't excuse what she did, but it added a layer of tragic, complicated gray to a situation I had only been able to see in black and white. The breaking point came 2 weeks later. It was a Saturday. I was at the grocery store. My phone rang. It was Emily. Hey, Dad. Surprise. My roommate is gone for the weekend, and I was getting stir-crazy. I just hopped on a bus. I'll be home in about an hour. See you soon. The line went dead. I stood in the middle of the cereal aisle, my blood turning to ice. An hour. She was an hour away. And Sarah was at the house, on the couch, pregnant. My carefully constructed world of lies was about to come crashing down. Panic seized me. Cold and absolute. I abandoned my half-full shopping cart in the middle of the aisle, ignoring the annoyed look from another shopper. My mind raced, calculating distances and times. The bus station was 20 minutes from our house. It would take me at least 15 minutes to get home from the grocery store. I had a window of maybe 45 minutes. If I was lucky. 45 minutes to erase all traces of the woman living in my house. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers clumsy and slick with sweat. I called the house. No, I couldn't. Sarah didn't have a phone anymore. I dialed my own number, hoping she'd hear the landline ringing and pick up. It rang and rang, the sound echoing in my ear, each unanswered ring tightening the knot of dread in my stomach. Finally, the answering machine picked up. My own cheerful, recorded voice sounded like a cruel joke. Damn it, I muttered. Hanging up, I sprinted out of the store into my car, my heart hammering against my ribs. I drove home with a reckless urgency I hadn't felt in years, running a yellow light, honking at a car driving too slowly in front of me. The quiet, tree-lined streets of Maple Creek seemed to mock my frantic state. Every possible scenario played out in my head, each one worse than the last. Emily walking in to find Sarah on the couch. The confrontation. The screaming. The look of utter betrayal on my daughter's face when she realized I had been lying to her for weeks. The promise I had made to her promised me you won't take her back ever would be revealed not just as broken, but as a deliberate, calculated deception. I would lose my daughter. It was that simple. In my misguided attempt to shield everyone from more pain, I had set the stage for a catastrophe. I screeched into the driveway, gravel crunching under the tires. I didn't even turn the engine off properly before I was out of the car and running to the front door, fumbling with my keys. I burst inside, shouting her name. Sarah. Sarah. Where are you? The house was silent. The living room was empty. The Afghan was folded neatly on the back of the sofa. The coffee mug from the morning was gone. For a wild, hopeful second, I thought she might have left, that she had finally understood the impossibility of the situation and had simply walked away. Then I heard a noise from upstairs. A soft, rhythmic sound. Thump, thump, thump. My blood ran cold. Don't go upstairs. Don't go near Emily's room. My own rules. My one sacred boundary in this fucked up situation. I took the stairs two at a time, my anger and fear churning into a toxic brew. I pushed open the door to Emily's bedroom. And there she was. Sarah was sitting on the floor, in the middle of our daughter's room. Her back was to me. She had a box of old photographs on her lap, the ones Emily kept on the top shelf of her closet. Pictures were spread all around her on the floor. US of the Grand Canyon. Emily's 5th birthday party. A picture of Sarah and a tiny infant Emily. Both of them asleep, their cheeks pressed together. She was holding a small silver frame. In it was a picture of Emily and me, taken last summer, just before she left for college. We were laughing, my arm slung around her shoulder. A perfect father-daughter moment. The sound I had heard was Sarah rocking back and forth, gently bumping her head against Emily's bed frame. Thump, thump, thump. She was crying. Not the loud, desperate sobs from her first night back, but a silent, steady weeping. Tears dripped from her chin onto the photograph in her hands. She was trespassing on holy ground. This room was a shrine to the life she had abandoned, to the daughters she had betrayed. Seeing her there, surrounded by the evidence of the happiness she had thrown away, my panic was momentarily eclipsed by a wave of pure, unadulterated rage. What the hell are you doing? I snarled. She gasped and spun around, her eyes wide with fear. She scrambled to her feet, dropping the pictures, which scattered across the pink rug. David. I missed her. I wanted to feel close to her. You have no right to be in this room, I said, my voice low and shaking with fury. You have no right to touch her things. You have no right to even look at her pictures. I'm still her mother, she whispered, her voice choked with tears. Are you? I shot back. A mother doesn't do what you did. A mother doesn't choose a man over her own child. Especially not that man. The cruelty of my words hung in the air. She visibly flinched, wrapping her arms around her stomach as if to protect her unborn child from my venom. In that moment, I didn't care. I wanted to wound her, but there was no time for this. The clock was ticking. Get out of here, I said, my voice regaining its urgency. Now. We have to go. Emily is on her way home. She'll be here in 20 minutes. The color drained from her face. Oh my God. Yes. Oh my God. I mimicked sarcastically. Now get your things. Your bag. Your coat. Whatever you have. You have to be gone before she gets here. Panic propelled her into action. She rushed past me, down the stairs. I followed, watching her frantically gather the few belongings she had, which amounted to a small, worn duffel bag and a thin coat. Where will I go? She asked, her eyes wide with terror. I don't know. And right now, I don't care, I said, shoving her coat into her hands. Go to a shelter. A motel. Go anywhere but here. I'll give you some cash. I pulled my wallet out, emptying all the bills into her hand without counting. It was a few $100s. Just go. Now. I herded her toward the front door, a grim shepherd driving a diseased sheep from the flock. She paused on the threshold, turning back to look at me. Her face was a mask of despair. David. Go. Sarah. I said, my voice hard. I couldn't look at her. I couldn't afford another moment of pity. Go. She gave me one last, broken look, then turned and hurried down the porch steps to her car. I watched her get in. Watched the engine sputter to life. I watched as she pulled away from the curb and drove down the street, not looking back. I stayed at the door until her car disappeared around the corner. Then I closed the door and leaned my forehead against the cool wood, my body trembling with adrenaline and relief. I had done it. I had averted disaster. I had kept my promise. I spent the next 15 minutes in a frenzy of cleaning, moving through the house like a crime scene cleaner trying to erase all evidence of an unwanted presence. I fluffed the cushions on the sofa where she had slept. I took the Afghan and shoved it into the back of the linen closet. I opened the windows to air out the faint scent of her perfume. I went back up to Emily's room and carefully gathered all the scattered photos, putting them back in the box and placing it on the highest shelf, where it belonged. The room had to be perfect. The house had to be perfect. My life had to be perfect. When Emily's bus pulled up at the end of the street, I was waiting on the porch, a welcoming smile plastered on my face. I felt like the biggest hypocrite in the world. "Dad," she called out, waving as she walked up the path, a backpack slung over her shoulder. She looked better. The color was back in her cheeks, and the haunted look in her eyes had receded, replaced by a weary resilience. "Hey, kiddo," I said, hugging her tightly. The hug was for her, but it was also for me, a desperate act of reassurance. "Glad you came home." "Me too," she said, pulling back and looking up at the house. "It feels good to be here." The words were a knife in my gut. This place she thought of as a sanctuary was the very place I had harbored the person who had hurt her most. The weekend was a delicate dance on a tightrope. I was so terrified of slipping up, of saying something that would give me away. I watched Emily as she moved through the house, my heart in my throat, praying she wouldn't notice anything amiss, that she wouldn't find a stray hairpin, or catch a scent that didn't belong. On Sunday afternoon, as she was packing her bag to go back to campus, she paused. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "for the first time, the house doesn't feel so sad." I forced a smile. "Maybe we're just getting used to it, finding our new normal." "Yeah," she said, a small, genuine smile gracing her lips. "Maybe we are." She looked at me, her expression softening. "It's because of you, Dad. You've been so strong through all of this. I don't know what I would have done without you." She came over and gave me another hug, and in that moment, the weight of my deceit was crushing. I was her rock, her hero, and I was a liar. I had built our new normal on a foundation of lies. I hugged her back, my throat tight with unspoken confessions. That night, after she was gone, the silence of the house returned, but it was different. It was heavier, filled with the guilt of what I had done. I poured myself a larger than usual glass of whiskey and sat in my armchair. I had succeeded. I had protected Emily. I had gotten Sarah out of my house. I should have felt relieved. Instead, I felt a gnawing, terrible unease. I thought of Sarah, out there somewhere, pregnant, alone, with a few $100s in her pocket, sleeping in her car again, or worse, for all her sins, for the monstrous things she had done. She was still a person, and I had thrown her into the dark. The thought tormented me. I tried to push it away, to focus on the fact that I had done what was necessary for my daughter. But the image of her face, that last broken look before she left, was burned into my mind. An hour later, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. I almost didn't answer it, but some instinct told me I had to. "Hello." The voice on the other end was frantic, professional. "Am I speaking with David Miller?" "Yes." "Who is this?" "This is Nurse Carlson from Maple Creek General Hospital. I'm calling about a Sarah Miller. She was admitted to the emergency room about an hour ago. You're listed as her emergency contact." The whiskey glass slipped from my numb fingers and shattered on the hardwood floor. "What happened?" I choked out. "Is she okay?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. "There was a complication with the pregnancy," the nurse said, her voice gentle. "She started bleeding. She's in labor. Mr. Miller. It's very premature. The doctor says you should get here as soon as you can." The drive to the hospital was a surreal, frantic blur. The sanitized voice of the nurse echoed in my head, each word a separate, sharp-edged stone. Complication. Bleeding. Premature labor. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. The rain-slicked road ahead illuminated in strobing flashes of red and blue from the ambulance. That had passed me moments before. Was it for her? My mind refused to complete the thought. This wasn't supposed to happen. She was supposed to be gone. A problem I had successfully exiled from my life. But the universe, in its cruel and infinite wisdom, had decided to drag me back in, to chain me to her fate in the most visceral way imaginable. I felt a cold, terrifying certainty that my life was caught in a current, pulling me toward a shore I had no desire to reach. When I arrived at Maple Creek General, the emergency room was a chaotic symphony of controlled panic. Beeping machines, hurried footsteps, hushed, urgent voices. I gave my name at the front desk, and a weary-looking nurse led me down a sterile hallway to a small, windowless waiting room. "The doctor will be out to speak with you shortly." "Mr. Miller," she said with a practiced, sympathetic smile that didn't reach her eyes. "She's in surgery now." "Surgery?" The word hit me like a physical blow. I thought you said she was in labor. It's an emergency C-section. The nurse explained gently. The baby's in distress. So is she. Her blood pressure is dangerously high. She patted my arm. Try not to worry. She's in the best hands. Then she was gone, leaving me alone in the small, beige room. The air smelled of antiseptic and fear. I paced the worn linoleum floor. A caged animal. Every tick of the clock on the wall was an eternity. She was in surgery. Her life, and the life of that child, were hanging in the balance. And I, against all logic, was her emergency contact, the last port in her storm. My feelings were a tangled, incomprehensible mess. Was I worried about her? Yes. A part of me was terrified. The part that still remembered the 25 years we'd spent together. The vows we'd made. The daughter we'd raised. The thought of her dying on an operating table was a horror I couldn't bear. But tangled with that fear was a dark, ugly thread of resentment. Why did this have to be my burden? Why, after everything, was I the one sitting here, tearing myself apart for her? And the baby. Leo's baby. An innocent life. Caught in the wreckage of our mistakes. What was I supposed to feel for this child? This symbol of my humiliation? I felt nothing. A cold, terrifying void. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was Emily. My heart seized. Hey, Dad. Just checking in. Got back to the dorm okay. The weekend was nice. It was really nice to just be home. Her voice was so normal. So blissfully unaware. It was from a different universe. A world where mothers didn't run off with their daughters' boyfriends and end up fighting for their lives in an emergency room. I'm glad you had a good time. I said. My voice strained. I was standing in the middle of the hospital waiting room, trying to sound like I was sitting in her quiet den. The lie was suffocating me. Are you okay? Dad, you sound weird. Just tired. Sweetie, a long weekend. Okay. Well, get some rest. Love you. I love you. Too. I whispered. And ended the call. The guilt was a physical sickness. I was living a double life. A gatekeeper of monstrous secrets. And the walls were closing in. And our past. Then too. I drank bitter, burnt coffee from a styrofoam cup. I flipped through old, torn magazines without reading a single word. Finally, a doctor in blue scrubs, her face tired but kind, entered the room. Mr. Miller. I shot to my feet. Is she? Sarah is stable, the doctor said. And I felt a wave of relief so powerful my knees went weak. She lost a lot of blood, and her pressure is still a concern. But she's out of surgery and in recovery. She's a fighter. And the baby? I asked, the words feeling foreign in my mouth. The doctor's expression softened. We have a baby boy. He's very small. 6 weeks premature. But he's breathing on his own for now. He's in the NICU. Just as a precaution. He's a fighter. Too. She smiled. You can see your wife in a little while. If you'd like. And your son. Your son. The words hung in the air. A catastrophic misunderstanding. She didn't know. To the rest of the world, I was the husband. The father. David Miller. Family man. The lie had taken on a life of its own. He's not my son. I said. The words feeling like a betrayal. Even though they were the truth. The doctor's smile faltered. She recovered quickly. Her expression shifting to one of professional neutrality. I see. I'm sorry. Her chart listed you as her husband. We're separated. I mumbled, feeling the need to explain, to justify my presence there. Well, she said, her tone gentle again. She's going to need support. She's been through a major trauma, physically and emotionally. I just nodded, unable to speak. They let me see her a half hour later. She was in a private room, pale and still against the white sheets, dwarfed by the machines that beeped and whirred around her. And 4 was taped to the back of her hand. She looked impossibly fragile, like a bird with a broken wing. The vibrant, defiant woman who had walked out of my life months ago was gone. In her place was the small, broken person. Her eyes fluttered open as I approached the bed. They were cloudy with medication, but they focused on my face. David, she whispered, her voice a dry rasp. Hey, I said softly, pulling a chair close to the bed. The baby? She asked, her eyes full of fear. He's okay, I said. He's small, but they said he's strong. Relief washed over her face. And for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, she looked at me with something other than guilt or desperation. It was gratitude. Pure, unadulterated gratitude. It was unsettling. They told me I almost died. She said, her voice barely audible. You did. I said, my voice thicker than I intended. You scared the hell out of me. Sarah. A single tear rolled from the corner of her eye and traced a path through the exhaustion on her face. I'm sorry. She whispered. It was the first time she had apologized for anything. And it wasn't for the affair. Or for leaving. Or for destroying our family. It was for the inconvenience of almost dying. We sat in silence for a long time. The only sounds were the steady beeps of the heart monitor. I didn't know what to say. There was too much to say. So we said nothing. A nurse eventually came in and told me I should visit the NICU. It's important for the baby to have contact, she said, looking pointedly at me. The lie was still alive. Walking the halls of the hospital, I felt like I was moving in a dream as I followed her to the neonatal intensive care unit. It was a quiet, dimly lit room, filled with incubators that looked like tiny spaceships. Inside each one was a miracle of life, impossibly small and fragile. The nurse led me to one in the corner. Here he is, she said softly. I looked through the clear plastic wall, and there he was. He was so small I could have held him in the palm of one hand. His skin was reddish and wrinkled, his face tiny and delicate. He had a wisp of dark hair, the same color as Leo's. He was hooked up to tiny wires and tubes, but his little chest was rising and falling in a steady, determined rhythm. He was a stranger. He was the product of my wife's affair. He was the reason my daughter cried herself to sleep for weeks. And yet, as I stood there watching him, this tiny, innocent creature fighting for his life, all the anger and hatred I had felt began to feel irrelevant. It was a heavy, useless thing in the face of this raw, vulnerable new life. He hadn't asked for any of this. He wasn't a symbol. He was just a baby who needed someone. The nurse opened a small portal on the side of the incubator. You can touch him, she encouraged. I hesitated. Then, slowly, I reached my hand inside. The air was warm and humid. I gently laid one finger on his tiny, perfect hand. His fingers, no bigger than grains of rice, instinctively curled around mine. A jolt went through me. A connection. It was terrifying. It was profound. It was something I was not prepared for. Something I did not want. In that moment, standing in the quiet, sterile room, with this tiny, alien hand wrapped around my finger, the full weight of my situation crashed down on me. This was my climax. My point of no return. Sarah was broken and weak in a hospital bed. This baby, this innocent casualty, was alone in a plastic box, and I was the only person in the world who connected the two of them. The choice was no longer about whether to let Sarah stay on my couch for a few nights. The choice was about what to do with these two broken human beings who had, through a series of terrible decisions, become my responsibility. My phone buzzed again. I knew, without looking, that it was Emily, probably calling to say goodnight. I looked at the baby, Leo's son, clinging to my finger. I thought of Sarah, lying in her hospital bed, alone. And I thought of my daughter, safe in her dorm room, believing her father was a man of his word. My world was split in two, and I was standing in the chasm, holding the hands of both sides. And I knew, with a sickening certainty, that no matter what I did next, someone was going to fall. The hospital became the new, surreal landscape of my life. Days bled into one another, marked not by the sun, but by the shift changes of the nurses and the quiet, rhythmic beeping of machines. I existed in a strange purgatory, shuttling between Sarah's recovery room and the hushed, reverent atmosphere of the NICU. I was living a lie so profound that it had become my reality. To the staff, I was David Miller, the concerned husband, the anxious new father. They would give me sympathetic smiles, offer me coffee, and update me on the family's progress. I would nod and thank them, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. Sarah recovered slowly. The physical trauma of the surgery began to heal, but a deeper, more pervasive exhaustion clung to her. She was quiet, subdued. The defiant, desperate woman who had returned to my doorstep was gone, replaced by someone fragile and uncertain. We rarely spoke of what had happened. The betrayal, the lies. Leo was all a vast, unspoken territory that we both tacitly agreed not to enter. Our conversations were small and functional, focused on the immediate present. Did the doctor say anything new? How is he today? Do you need another pillow? It was a fragile truce, a way to coexist in the same small room without shattering into a million pieces. My time with the baby boy they had named Noah, a name Sarah had whispered to a nurse when she was still groggy from anesthesia, was even more complicated. I would stand by his incubator for hours, watching his tiny chest rise and fall. The nurses taught me how to change his microscopic diapers through the portals, how to hold a swab of milk to his lips. They called it bonding. I didn't know what to call it. It wasn't love. It wasn't attachment. It was a sense of profound, terrifying responsibility. This tiny, helpless creature was a fact. He existed, and his existence was inextricably linked to mine. I still felt the jolt every time he gripped my finger. A primal, biological response that defied logic and reason. He was not mine, but he was here, and I was the only one showing up for him. Sarah was too weak to leave her bed for more than a few minutes at a time. Of Leo, there was no sign. There was just me. All the while, I maintained the facade with Emily. Our nightly phone calls became the most stressful part of my day. I would huddle in a deserted hospital corridor, my voice a low murmur, trying to sound normal and bored. Another thrilling evening at home. Dad? She'd ask, her voice light. You know it. I'd lie, the hum of a floor polisher echoing down the hall, just grading some papers, thinking about what to make for dinner. Don't work too hard. Get some sleep. I will. Sweetie. You too. Each lie was a small tear in the fabric of my relationship with her. I was protecting her. I told myself, what would be the point of telling her the truth? What would she do? Come to the hospital and see the mother she hated lying broken in a bed, with the son of the man who had destroyed her? The truth was a weapon of mass destruction, and I was keeping it locked away. But the secret was a cancer, growing inside me, poisoning everything. A week after Noah was born, Sarah was discharged. The doctor said she was well enough to go home, but that Noah would need to stay in the NICU for at least a few more weeks, until he gained enough weight and strength. The question hung in the air, unspoken but deafening. Home. Where was home for her? She had no money, no friends to turn to. She had nowhere to go. I drove her from the hospital. She was silent in the passenger seat, clutching the small bag of belongings the hospital had given her. She looked out the window at the familiar streets of Maple Creek, as if seeing them for the first time. When I pulled into our driveway, she didn't move. She just stared at the house. I can't ask you to do this, David, she whispered, her voice trembling. You're not asking, I said, my voice flat, weary. I had wrestled with this decision for days, and there was no other answer. You're recovering from major surgery. Your son is in the hospital. You have nowhere else to go. You'll stay here, in the guest room, until Noah is out of the hospital and you can figure out a plan. It wasn't an act of forgiveness. It wasn't even an act of pity. It was a logistical necessity. A cold, practical solution to an impossible problem. Bringing her back into the house was different this time. It wasn't a temporary measure. It felt permanent. Her presence permeated the space. I set her up in the guest room at the end of the hall, a room that had been gathering dust for years. I made the bed with fresh linens. I brought her meals on a tray. I drove her to the hospital every day to see Noah, and then I would drive her back. We were living as roommates, bound by a fragile, unspoken contract. The house was quiet, tense. The air was thick with words we couldn't say. We avoided each other's eyes. We moved around each other with a careful, rehearsed choreography, trying not to brush up against the raw, exposed nerves of our shared history. The house became a sick parody of a home. I was caring for the woman who had broken my heart. I was spending my afternoons sitting by the incubator of her son. And I was lying to my own daughter about every minute of it. My life had become a precarious, unsustainable structure, and I knew it was only a matter of time before it all came crashing down. Emily started talking about coming home for spring break, which was just a few weeks away. The idea filled me with a cold, sickening dread. I made excuses. I might have to go to a history conference that week. The house is getting painted. It's a total mess. My lies became more elaborate, more desperate. She was disappointed, but she accepted it. For now. But I knew I couldn't put her off forever. One evening, I found Sarah in the nursery, the room that had been Emily's when she was a baby. and had since become a storage room for old furniture and boxes. She had opened the window, and the scent of the cool spring air filled the room. She was standing in the middle of the floor, just looking around. "What are you doing in here?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. This room was a sanctuary of memories, of a time when our family was whole. Her presence here felt like another trespass. "I was just thinking," she said softly, not looking at me. "He'll need a place to sleep when he comes home." The casual, domestic nature of the statement stunned me. "When he comes home." She said it as if it were the most natural thing in the world, as if he were my son. And this was our home, and we were a family preparing for the arrival of our baby. "Sarah," I said, my voice low and dangerous, "let's be clear about something. This is a temporary arrangement. This is not a home for you and for Noah. This is a stopgap, a place for you to get back on your feet. Nothing more." She finally turned to look at me, and her eyes were filled with a deep, weary sadness. "Where do you expect me to go, David? I have nothing. I have a premature baby who will need constant care. I can't work. Who will hire me? What am I supposed to do?" "That is not my problem to solve," I said, the words cold and hard. "Isn't it?" she replied, a flicker of her old fire returning. "You're the one who let me back in. You're the one who sits with him at the hospital every day. You hold his hand. David, I've seen you. You talked to him. What did you think was going to happen? Did you think he would just disappear?" She was right. I had been living in a state of willful denial, focusing only on the next hour. The next day, I had refused to think about the future, because the future was an impossible, terrifying landscape. What would happen when Noah was discharged? Would I really throw a recovering woman and a newborn baby out onto the street? The man I used to be wouldn't have been able to do it. But what about the man I was now? The bitter, angry, broken man she had created? "I did it because he's an innocent baby," I said, my voice rising. "And because, for some reason I can no longer fathom, I still feel some sense of responsibility for you. But don't mistake that for forgiveness. Don't mistake it for a second chance. There is nothing left to save here. Sarah, it's gone. You and he destroyed it." The word hung in the air between us. He, Leo, the ghost that was always in the room with us. She flinched, wrapping her arms around herself. "I know," she whispered. "Do you think I don't know that? I lie awake every night in that guest room, in your house, and I think about what I've lost. I think about Emily. I think about the life we had, and I know I can never get it back. I need help. David, I'm drowning, and you're the only one who's thrown me a rope." We stood there, on opposite sides of the empty nursery, two shipwreck survivors on a desolate island. We were trapped by our past, trapped by our choices, and trapped by the tiny, fragile life in an incubator 5 miles away. A few weeks later, the call came. Noah had gained enough weight. He was breathing consistently on his own. He was ready to come home. My carefully constructed dam of denial finally broke. The future was no longer a distant threat. It was here. It was a 7-pound baby boy in a car seat. I drove them back from the hospital in a state of numb disbelief. Sarah sat in the back, right next to the car seat, her eyes never leaving Noah. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror. A woman, a baby, and a man who was not her husband and not his father, driving to a house that was not their home. We were a lie on wheels. Bringing him into the house was the strangest, most painful moment yet. The house Emily had grown up in. The house where I had built my life. The air was filled with the cries of another woman's child. Leo's child. The first few days were a blur of sleeplessness and tension. The baby's cries echoed through the walls, a constant reminder of our impossible situation. I would find myself stumbling out of my room at 3 in the morning, drawn by the sound, to see Sarah pacing the living room with the crying infant, her face a mask of exhaustion. I tried to keep my distance, to remain detached. He was her responsibility. But it was impossible. I would hear the desperation in her voice as she tried to soothe him, and I would find myself in the kitchen, warming a bottle. I would see her pass out from sheer exhaustion on the couch, and I would pick up the baby from the bassinet beside her and walk him, until he fell asleep on my shoulder. I was becoming a father to my wife's lover's son. One night, I was holding him. His small, warm body nestled against my chest. His breathing was a soft, rhythmic whisper against my neck. He smelled of milk and powder. He was so incredibly real. I looked down at his sleeping face, at his long eyelashes resting on his chubby cheeks, The anger and resentment I had harbored for so long felt distant, faded. In its place was something else, something terrifying. It was a feeling of connection, a feeling that felt dangerously close to love. And as I stood there in the dark, silent house, holding this child, I realized the truth. Sarah was right. I had thrown her a rope, and now she, and this baby, were lashed to me. I couldn't just cut them loose. I didn't know how. I had made a choice that first night at the hospital, and every small choice since then had pulled the knot tighter. I wasn't just sheltering them anymore. I was becoming part of this new, broken, impossibly complicated thing that could not be called a family, but was no longer just me. It was in that moment of horrifying clarity that my phone, which I'd left on the kitchen counter, began to ring. It was late, after midnight. My heart stopped. It could only be one person. I carefully placed the sleeping baby back in his bassinet and walked to the kitchen. I looked at the screen. It was Emily. My hand trembled as I answered. Emily? Is everything okay? Her voice was tight, strained. A voice I hadn't heard in months. I know. Dad. Know what? Sweetie? I asked, my blood turning to ice. I know she's there, she said, her voice cracking with a pain so raw it was like a physical blow through the phone. My roommate's cousin works at Maple Creek General, in the billing department. She saw the records, Sarah Miller, and a baby boy, and the home address listed for both of them is ours. There was a pause, and then her voice came out as a broken whisper. How could you? You promised me. You promised me. Dad. The silence on the other end of the line was a roar in my ears. It was the sound of my daughter's world shattering for the second time. And this time, I was the one holding the hammer. The intricate web of lies I had so carefully constructed had been torn apart by a single, mundane piece of hospital bureaucracy. Emily. I started, my voice a dry croak. Listen to me. It's not what you think, isn't it? She shot back, her whisper turning into a raw, ragged cry. What is it then? Dad. Is Mom not there? Is there not a baby's baby in my house right now? Are you going to lie to me again? Every word was a perfectly aimed dart, striking the heart of my guilt. I had no defense. She was here, I admitted, the words tasting like poison. The past tense was crucial. Emily. She was discharged. She had nowhere to go. The hospital wouldn't release a newborn to a homeless woman. I brought them here. But it's over. She's gone. A confused silence met my words. Gone? What do you mean? Gone? I made her leave this morning, I said, the memory of it fresh and raw. I saw it clearly, Sarah standing by the door, the baby bundled in her arms, her face a mask of quiet resignation. I had driven her to a women's shelter in the next town over, a place that helps single mothers. I had given her every dollar I had. It was a cold, clinical, and brutal act, an amputation. I broke my promise to you, Emily. I continued, my voice thick with shame. I let her into this house, and I will never forgive myself for that. But you have to believe me. It was only until I could find a safe place for them. My home, our home, it's for you. It was always for you. She is not here now. They are gone. I waited. My breath held. For her judgment. For the screaming. The anger. The final, unforgivable click of her hanging up. Instead, all I heard was a soft, shuddering breath. You made her leave, she whispered. Yes. Another long pause. I have to go, she said, her voice small and uncertain. The line went dead. She didn't hang up in anger. It was something else. Shock. Confusion. I didn't know if I had made things better or worse. I had performed the surgery, cut Sarah and her child out of our lives, but I didn't know if the patient or relationship would survive. I spent the next 2 weeks in a new kind of hell, a hell of waiting. The house was silent again, but it was a different silence. It wasn't the heavy, oppressive silence of Sarah's presence. It was a clean, empty silence. I had purged the house. I had packed away the bassinet. I had aired out the rooms. I had erased every trace of them. But the silence was filled with the ghost of my daughter's voice, the uncertainty of her last words. Spring break started. I didn't expect to hear from her. I had resigned myself to spending the week alone, a man in an empty house, paying the price for his sins. Then, on Saturday afternoon, a car pulled into the driveway. It wasn't a taxi. It was her familiar old car. I watched from the living room window as she got out. She didn't look angry. She just looked tired. She stood on the walkway for a long time, just looking at the house. Her house. Before finally walking to the door. I opened it before she could knock. We stood there for a moment, an awkward, painful silence stretching between us. "Can I come in?" she asked softly. I stepped aside, my heart pounding. She walked into the entryway and looked around. Her eyes scanned the living room, noting the absence of the bassinet, the absence of another life. She took a deep, shuddering breath, as if the air was finally clean enough to breathe. "She's really gone?" she asked, her eyes meeting mine. They weren't hard anymore. They were just sad. "She's really gone," I confirmed. I drove her to a shelter. "They'll help her get on her feet. She and the baby, they'll be taken care of." Emily nodded slowly, processing this. Was it hard? I thought of Sarah's face as I left her on the steps of that anonymous brick building. The look of utter desolation. It was the hardest thing I've ever had to do. I said, my voice hoarse. "Except for telling you the truth." Tears welled in her eyes then, and in mine. She didn't move to hug me. The distance was still there, but the wall between us had begun to crumble. "I came to get my things," she said, just as she had on the phone. But the tone was different. It wasn't an accusation. It was a statement. "I know," I said. "Stay for dinner first. Please, let me just make you dinner." She hesitated, then gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. That evening, we moved around the kitchen together. We didn't talk about Sarah. We didn't talk about Leo. We talked about her classes, about a funny professor she had, about a book she was reading. It was small talk, but it was the most important conversation of my life. It was the sound of two people trying to find their way back to each other, carefully stepping around the rubble of what had been destroyed. We ate at the dining room table. The empty chair where Sarah always sat was a physical presence. We both felt it. Neither of us mentioned it. After dinner, as we were clearing the plates, she finally spoke about it. "I hated you," she said, her voice quiet but clear. She didn't look at me. She just stared at the plate in her hands. When I found out she was here, I felt a hatred so strong it scared me. It was worse than when she first left. "Because this time, it was you who betrayed me." "I know," I whispered, my own voice thick with regret. "And I am so sorry, Emily. I was a coward. I was weak. I should have never let her cross the threshold." She finally looked at me, her eyes searching my face. "Why did you make her leave?" "Because when I got that phone call from you," I said, meeting her gaze without flinching, "I heard your voice, and I realized a simple truth. I have one child. You. My job is to protect you. My life is to be your father. Everything else is just noise." I had to choose, and it was never really a choice. A single tear rolled down her cheek. She reached out and put her hand on my arm. It was the first time she had touched me in weeks. The simple contact was a jolt of life, of hope. "I'm not going to stay with my friend," she said. "I'm staying here. For spring break." Relief, so powerful it almost buckled my knees, washed over me. "Okay," I said. My voice choked. "Okay, kiddo." She didn't take her things back to her friend's house. She unpacked her bag and put it in her room. Her presence filled the house again, chasing away the ghosts, filling the silence. It wasn't a magic fix. The wound was deep, and the scar would always be there. There were days when a shadow would cross her face, and I knew she was thinking about it. There were nights when I would wake up, the image of a tiny baby in an incubator flashing in my mind, and I would feel a pang of something I refused to name. We never talked about Sarah or Noah again. It was a locked room in the house of our lives, a door we both agreed never to open. Our healing was a quiet, deliberate process. We rebuilt our family. A smaller, leaner version, forged in fire. We took long walks in the woods behind the house. We cooked together. We watched old movies on Friday nights. We slowly, carefully, pieced back together the trust that had been shattered. One afternoon, a few months later, an envelope arrived in the mail. There was no return address. Inside was a single photograph. It was a picture of Noah, a few months older now, smiling, sitting up on his own. On the back, in Sarah's familiar script, were 3 words: "He's okay." I looked at the picture for a long time. The boy had her eyes. I felt a faint, distant sadness. the ghost of a pain I had learned to live with. Then I slid the photograph back into the envelope. Emily came into the kitchen. "What's that?" she asked. "Nothing," I said, tossing the envelope into the trash. "Just junk mail." She smiled at me. A real, genuine smile. The kind I thought I might never see again. "Good," she said. "I'm starving. What's for dinner?" I looked at my daughter. My strong, resilient, beautiful daughter. The center of my world. We had survived. We were scarred. Yes. But we were whole. Our love was the only thing that had endured. The only thing that mattered. And it was more than enough.